So tell me about, can you pinpoint when you started to have a faith transition? Like how old were you? Where were you at the time? Were you in school, career? And what did that feel like?
Sure. I think like most people, faith and belief kind of goes in waves up and down, right? So growing up in the church, I always felt very spiritual. I always felt like I had a very good connection to what I was taught was the Holy Ghost, right? And that was something that, my mom tells me stories of even as like a 4-year-old, 3-year-old kid, like we said a prayer because I lost a toy and I described something like springs in my head, kind of this like tingly sensation that I recognized as the spirit and felt that throughout my entire life. In high school, post high school, I kind of wavered in belief with God, but not so much in the sense that I do like now. It wasn't like I don't believe in God at all. It was just kind of like, where are you? Are you there? Do you care about me? Kind of feelings. Just a very dark time in my life. So I actually didn't serve a
Can
mission
I
until I was
can
20.
I ask
Oh yeah,
why?
yeah. So like a lot of what I've come to find, a lot of male members of the church and a lot of female members as well. As an adolescent, I struggled with pornography, masturbation kind of stuff, to be frank. And I never really felt worthy. And that is a whole conversation. I could talk about that for several hours. But to put it briefly, I guess I could just say that I never really felt like I could fully trust myself, overcome that kind of thing. I would turn to God and get better for a little while and then kind of fall back. And because of that, I couldn't serve a mission when I was 18. My graduating class was the first ones with the age change. My peers were going on their missions right after high school for the first time that this has ever happened, right? For the men at least. And so I went to school for a year and came back and worked for a couple of years and then kind of had a come to Jesus moment in that sense. And really felt like I gained a stronger testimony of God and Jesus Christ, felt like I could, overcome those difficulties. And I wanted to serve a mission. So I went on a mission at age 22, which is a little bit more unorthodox for our, at least the Utah culture, right? So there was that time in my life, kind of like post graduation to pre mission, that I wavered in faith, but not like to the extent that I did a couple years ago, with my faith crisis really like, hit the fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that first happened December 5th, 2021. Like I know the exact day, and because it was just so life changing for me, and just had a very dark night of the soul. Like I said, I won't get into major specifics, but I guess I just had questions and I wasn't sure where to turn. So I turned to God in prayer, and the answer I got back was, it's not true. And those feelings of feeling the spirit in my life tell me that it was true, and then feeling those exact feelings tell me that it wasn't, was just very confusing for me for a while. And it was a slow exit for sure.
Can I ask a quick interjecting
Mm-hmm.
question? So,
Yeah.
listeners, I don't know if you're thinking the same thing that I am, but like in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, how can you hear something from the spirit that's negating itself? So anyway, I mean, you don't need to answer that because
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say to the listeners, you might have that same thought in your head. And I'm just pausing here, not because
Yeah. No,
I
go ahead.
wanted to say it, but this is not the time. Like if you're having the first conversation with a person who's like bearing their soul, and thank you so much, Mitch, for being so willing and saying all these things. Like it is really impactful. And I am feeling the emotion behind all of this. Like I really am feeling the connection over this. But listeners, like I have to stop myself from interjecting and trying to argue through like his experience, right? Try and convince him that like the interpretation of his experience isn't the one he was supposed to come to, right? Like, and so even though I just interjected, it's
No,
not,
you're
it's
fine.
not to like get into it with you, Mitch, but just to remind myself and the listeners, like, that's not why we're here. We're trying to teach ourselves to just listen. So anyway,
Yeah.
that was kind of a tangent, but I wanted to try and work through that out loud with the listeners.
For sure. And to your point, I mean, it's not an easy question. Like it took me months to figure out the answer to that question for myself, why I felt this discrepancy in the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I came to my conclusion. Anyone else can come to theirs, and that's totally
Right.
fine, right? So,
Right. And that's the whole thing, is that at the end of the day, like we have to honor the journey of the person that's sitting across from us. We don't know. I can't know what happened in your mind and in your heart.
mm-hmm.
And we have to remember that when we're having these difficult conversations with our friends and family.
For sure.
Okay. So I totally cut you off. Where were we
Oh
at?
no,
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Jared Halverson? So I actually took an institute class of his like a month later after that kind of first thing. He had like this course called Navigating Trials of Faith. So I was like, oh man, this is answer to prayer. Let me take this and I'll get better. I'll gain my testimony back, at least to a degree. Like I don't need to gain it all the way back to where I was. And that's kind of his whole spiel that he teaches, is that there's a creation, a fall, and an atonement, where you maybe have like a creation naive level of faith to begin with. Something major happens in your life and you have like this fall. And he believes that people will generally come to this atonement phase where it's kind of like this nuanced view of things and takes the good aspects of both parts. I really liked what he taught. I felt like, I can make this work. I can make this happen. But a month or two after, I kind of discovered some things that really, really upset me. Specifically with the temple, the history of the temple, it was something that I couldn't reconcile. And I think kind of at that point anyways, I was already starting to question things and kind of barely holding on. But that was, there was like 2 shelf breaker moments for me, I guess you could say. And there was other parts of my experience that kind of led up to that. Other questions I had and things like that. Part of this question is, how did I feel during that time? It was just so heavy. Like,
was it devastating?
Crisis is the best word I can use to describe it, right? I think that's why we often use that term, is because like my worldview was just crumbling, and what am I left with at the end of that, right? And I just wasn't sure where I would end up. Growing up in the church, I was kind of taught often that the worst place to be was an atheist, an ex-member of the church, an apostate. And I don't know, like that's kind of what I am now in a lot of ways.